What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Stable Cyclist Podcast, where we talk about bikes, mentality, and most importantly, mental health. I'm your host, JP, and this week I am joined by friend and longtime ultra-endurance professional Kelly Magelky, where we're going to talk about what it's like to race 24 hours. We're going to talk about how to become a professional athlete when you never played a sport in your life. And most importantly, we're going to talk about the mentality and the mental health side of things when you have failed to reach your goals. Let's jump into the interview. Well, Kelly Magelky, we just saw each other a week ago, not to date this straight out of the chute, but at the Maah Daah premiere of the documentary that is not public yet, but will be. It is good to see you again. My friend, we did not get enough time together because of weather and families and a lot of people wanting our time, but it's good to see you, man.
It's so good to see you too. And that was a really, really special night. And of course, I think we both knew going in we were not going to be talking much just because there's a lot of people to catch up with and are asking you a million questions. But super special night because my parents came with and we battled the roads, but it was 100% worth it.
For sure. And we will get back to your parents being there towards the end of this conversation. Maybe the most incredible moment for me of that whole production that we'll talk about in a little bit. But you're from Dickinson, North Dakota originally. And other than Andy Hampston, I can't think of any other professional bike racers out of North Dakota. And so how did you get from being this kid from Dickinson to being this professional who lives near Denver, Colorado?
Yeah, kind of simply put, I was never athletic growing up just because, I mentioned this in the film, but we didn't have time to do sports, and that wasn't a negative thing. That was just something that, I worked for my dad. And, but also, something that I do like sharing with people is I felt super intimidated. I'm not built to be a football player. I was never good at basketball. So when you're in a small community, your value is like, how good are you at sports? It seems like everyone's dad or their parents, it's like, is he on the basketball team? And so I just never felt like I had a place. And so I never chewed on that too much. That was just the way it was. And so, when I moved to Colorado, I was moving here to be a snowboard instructor. My best friend in high school, we had made this pact we were going to move to Aspen together. And he ended up tragically dying in a car accident when I was a junior. But that thought had always stuck with me. I moved to Denver, and his older brother, Micah, was like, you can stay on my couch. And he had a mountain bike there, and he was super into mountain biking, just reading mountain bike magazines. And I'm like, that's cool. Like a full suspension bike, like that exists. And he was like, yeah. And then his wife at the time was like, she had a mountain bike, and he goes, why don't you take her bike out and give it a ride, And so I did it, and it was just something totally extreme to me. I was like, this is so different, but it was really fun because I wasn't working when I got here. I was trying to find a job. What's interesting is when I started riding a bike seriously a few years later, people just I look back on this with just bewilderment because people would just come up to me that didn't know me, and they'd be like, man, you like can go up a hill fast, do you ever think about racing? And I'm like, no, like that's Lance Armstrong does that, but people kept saying that. And so, and I just kept riding because I loved it. And going uphill, to me, I didn't realize it felt easy. I just was like, this is what you do. All the trails here are straight up. And, one thing led to another, and people started to talk me into going out to, do a bike race. And I would do terrible. But then when I was working at a coffee shop, a bunch of professional cyclists would come in, Olympians, world champions, and they were just, what can I do to help you? They would like laugh. I'd be like, I threw up at mile 1, and they're like, what did you do to warm up? And I'm like, warm up? I had a couple of Snickers bars and hit the trail. And they're like, no. And so, ultimately what really got me from just being a weekend warrior to racing and excelling in racing are these people who became I say unofficial coaches, but they were 100% officially my coaches, but they were just people donating their time and talent. And this is just being open to meeting people. It's just a lesson that I've learned is like, I love hearing people's stories. And there was a woman named Mary who was a 2-time Olympian from Australia. And when I got to know her, I was like really starstruck because she had been to the Olympics and she had won every North American race that year. And she one day was like, do you want to go for a ride next week? I was like, yeah. She's like, well, meet me at 6:30 in the morning, the bottom of the, Golden Gate Canyon. It's like January, I'm like, it's dark. She's like, well, if you're not there, I'm heading up because I don't want to wait in the cold, And one thing led to another. And I was able to just, excel a lot. And then I just found I had a talent to go uphill. And I was very efficient at doing it. And people would be like, I don't know how you can go uphill so fast. And that just kind of gave me the confidence. And so it's just kind of these people who kind of kept me in my lane a little bit, and kind of at one point I just looked back and all of a sudden I'm like, I have a pro license. I mean, there's a lot in between there, but it was just, that's kind of how just people guide me along.
Yeah. So you said you didn't play any high school sports for various reasons. Was there some anxiety when all of a sudden you find yourself like, hey, I have a pro license, and today we think about whether it's our own kids playing sports or whether it's sports I'm coaching or involved with, like, oh, we're teaching these kids all these soft skills they need in life to survive in these bigger situations. And you end up with a pro license and you've never had any of these experiences. Did you feel you were missing some of those just like ways to think about situations, or had all these other life experiences you had with your dad doing car stuff and various other activities prepared you in a different way?
I've had no anxieties about it at all. I think that's a really good question. I think especially in society now, we are specializing kids in sports early on, and I understand the benefit of kids going into multiple sports. I love that our kids are playing soccer and doing things. But yeah, I think the nature of the sport, I know you know this, it's kind of one of those things where like you can't have a coach bench you, you can't, there's no politics. It's like the cream will rise to the top. You either have the talent to go uphill or downhill at a certain speed or not. And so if you push all that aside, people were just like, man, you have this natural talent to do this. And I mean, even to this day, even the fact we're talking right now on this podcast, I just feel like I know I've said this to you a lot, but I can't believe it. I feel like I'm still a new cyclist. I still am shocked every time, if I win a race, and I've just been enjoying it so much. It's like every time I'm like, man, I can't believe that happened. And so, it's a weird thing, but it is a really good question, because when you ask that, and I was thinking about that just now, I'm like, man, yeah, no, it was almost good to refresh and kind of move away from the anxiety of like, oh man, am I going to fail miserably in this team sport or something that I never had confidence in,
Yeah, for sure. So you start out, and obviously you do not start out as a 24-hour ultra endurance guy. You start out racing XCO, and you have some early success. I believe you were second at Sea Otter one of the years. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That wasn't in the final XC, but it was in one of the qualifiers, which was, we were still racing against like the best guys in the country. I mean, that was a good, huge result for me.
Sea Otter has been Sea Otter for a long time, and it is the deal. So yeah. So how do you go from being XCO guy to being 24 hours? Because that progression happened pretty quickly. Like, I think a lot of people think it happened over years, but you have that really great result in 2007 at Worlds in 24 hours. That's not long after you've become a pro. So how did that transition happen?
Naivety. There's the naivety of the challenge itself. I think this is probably what has benefited me and a lot of other people. I'm not a super analytical person, but I just was like, I want to go do this race and I want to go fast. I'm not interested in like surviving it. And I'm like, I wonder what people are going to do when you go off the gun hard and then just go as hard as you can for 24 hours. And then it's funny because that was all during that time. If people, like I think John Stamstead and all these early people would be like, if you survive and continue to pedal, you're going to win, And in those years in like 05, 06, 07 is when people were like, oh, it's on. Like the gun goes off and you get into position and you go. And it feels like a cross country race. And all these people will kind of criticize me for this, but I think a lot of those people that criticized me about that had never done a 24-hour solo race and finished on the podium. And it's just it's really hard, and my style of racing is like I kind of want to be in control in the beginning. I don't need to be off the front or anything, but so it was like interchangeable to me, because then I would just go back and race a full cross country race, in the middle of the season. I'd never stopped doing that, and most of my wins came from cross country races. There are a good amount of 100 milers and 50 milers, but yeah, so I kind of took the mentality of being a cross country racer and just applied it to 24-hour racing. It's gone catastrophically wrong at times, but it's also breeded some success too.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, you just said like you race at 24 hours just straight from the gun. What I believe a lot of people that have never done a 24-hour race want to know is like, who cares about the first 6 hours? I think a lot of people who race endurance stuff know what that first 6 hours feels like. My guess is most people who have not raced 24 hours but have dabbled in endurance stuff are really curious about hours 6 to 24, and specifically about hours 18 to 24. Yeah. So what is that like? Especially, I guess, racing through the night is something that is really intriguing to me.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's a lot of pulling yourself out of a dark place. One of my favorite trail runners is Courtney Dauwalter, and she talks about chiseling away at the pain cave. There's no glorifying or nothing glamorous about like when you're out at hour 8, even if you're out in the lead of a 24-hour race. It's lonely, you're tired, you constantly are like, why am I doing this? It doesn't matter. Why, why, what if I just stop? Yeah. And those are the moments where you just kind of have to tell yourself, like you got to keep going. And then you'll talk to some people on trail, so you go through this roller coaster. And a lot of times the biggest mental component that I hope a lot of people understand if they hear this is that I call this like the time, I don't know, it's how you kind of relate to time. So if I do a 12-hour race, I don't think I can do another mile after 12 hours. If I do a 24-hour race, I don't think I could do another mile after 24. But at hour 13, I'm still cruising along, And so a huge part of this is the mental game. But it's just making sure in those low moments, you know that you're going to come through that. I just did I'm 44 now, but I did a training camp earlier in April, and I was going through a pretty low point on the White Rim out in Moab, and one of my best friends, Josh Allen, one of my big training partners for a long time, he was like, hey man, you're going to get through it, ride through it. I know it's dark right now. It's okay. It's going to be dark for a bit, but you just just ride through it, And that time you don't really feel like you're going to, but you do, and all of a sudden, like 30 minutes later, you're like, man, that was a rough patch, So in a 24-hour race, you gotta know you're going to come through the other side. You also have to keep focusing on drinking and eating. It kind of gives you something to do. And then when you get towards the end of the race, you want nothing more. Well, really quick to go back to the night thing. The night riding, I have a huge bone to pick with people. So many people are like, oh, at night I go way faster. And I'm like, then you're not going fast enough during the day. I'm always, maybe if you're a runner and you're running at night, but I'm like, there's no way, because you just can't see, no matter how good of lights you have, you can't see like you need to see when you're flying downhill, And so, but riding at night is really fun. But when you're tired and in a 24-hour race, you see things all the time. this is universal, I think, for most people, but I see stuff jumping out from behind rocks. I'll see people or whatever, and that aren't there. It's the weirdest thing. That's the only time that actually happens in my life, but it happens when I'm riding at night. And then you realize when you start to see first light, that energy, it's like you hadn't been riding your bike. You do like a sunrise lap. I think everyone who's done a 24-hour race understands the sunrise lap is the one lap you look forward to the absolute most. And that gives you a whole shot in the arm. And then your crew is like, you only have 5 more hours. And you're like, whoa. And then it takes you right back to like, a 5-hour ride is a super long ride for me, but you got to take that out of your head. So it's just a constant like battle, it's just trying not to think too negatively. And then when you're riding a high, let's say you get some caffeine and you're just like, I love this trail. It's so fun. You kind of have to tamper that down too and just keep your powder dry. You're like, this is a marathon. We need to save our energy. So, it's kind of crazy. And every time I do them, I don't think I'm going to do another one, and then all of a sudden I'm signing up for another one, but yeah.
Yeah. So that self-talk you're talking about, of getting yourself out of that hole, is that like, you've done a lot of these. So is that something you practiced outside of the race? Did you practice that kind of thing in training? Maybe not conscious, like not like a plan, like I'm going to go out and self-talk myself today, but yeah. Are you working on those skills that in this kind of racing, I have to do it?
Yeah, I do. On big training rides, I think the number one thing than doing something that like you could actually do or physically do, I just tell myself, I'm like, I'm going to feel like this several times probably in a 24-hour race. And if I'm training or leading up to something like that, even a 100-mile race, I'm like, no matter how fit I am, no matter what is happening, you're going to hit some low points where you come around a corner and you feel like you're crawling, and then you start to go down the start place. And so the number one thing I do when I'm out on a training ride and I feel that way is like, you're going to feel this way. And then you got to ask yourself, do you want to go do the race? Because it's in the lowest time, where it's like, I don't really want to feel this way. And I always, I love the challenge of coming out of that, but I always think like, could it be food? Could it just be this? Or will I just ride myself out of it, But that's kind of the biggest thing I do, is just take a mental note of like, it's easy to talk about it when you're on the couch or, with your buddies drinking coffee. You're like, man, I can't wait. It's going to be so hard, And then when you are in that place where it's really hard, it's really dark. You're like, I don't want to continue,
For sure. Kelly, how did you learn how to do that? How did you learn that self-talk, other than just like getting in that place in a race and being like, oh my gosh, this is terrible? Or did you have some coaches, or did you I think that's what a lot of people don't know, how to like go about learning those kind of skills they need to survive a race like a 24-hour race or a really epic 100-miler.
Oh man, this is something that I absolutely love talking to people about, even if they're not athletes or cyclists. I talked to my co-producer about this, where I can't assume that I will tell somebody my experience and that they'll be, I can be like, you just need to ride through it. I used to be naive and think like, you're just not tough enough, or, I never really thought that, but kind of, it would go through my mind. I'm like, well, you're just not tough enough. And then I realized, I think my upbringing, I think there are things in my life that weren't super easy, and not like, we're not talking like a traumatic thing or anything, but it was just, having my parents get divorced at an early age, or, and then having to go back and forth, or both parents, like my stepdad, who I reference as my dad all the time, and my mom worked opposite schedules. So I'd be waiting outside after school and it's freezing cold, and that's an important moment. You're 15 years old, or 14 or 13, and you're like, everybody else got picked up, and what are you going to do? You can't complain. Who are you going to complain to? And I respect my parents so much. And I knew that they were never going to do anything on purpose, but it was just, they're surviving, and there was a lot of those moments in my life. And I feel like when I got into the cycling side of being an athlete, I felt like it was a privilege to be able to do what I was doing at that moment. And it was very hard And I would also think about those times or whatever, to be like, there's no way out, no way out of this, but through, and, and I don't know, it's kind of weird, and I wish I had I'm sure some doctor could definitely tell me, or some therapist could tell me exactly where that is. But yeah, I don't know. It's funny, I just, my wife will talk about this, and she knows this about me, but I'm like, I'm not the hardcore dude who's like, I need this. I need the hard challenge, I'm like, I want to be comfortable. I want to drink my tea and just sit here in a warm studio with a Christmas tree. Yeah. But there's something I love about it. Makes me feel alive, and it brings so much joy to my life because I like problem solving. A lot of that is problem solving, and it's just, maybe I'm wired that way to be like, we can get out of this, and there's no one to complain to. I don't know if that was a good answer or not, but
that was great, man. And I think that's the point of like a lot of the guests I'm going to have on here. Like, these are questions that, like, your answer isn't the right answer for everybody.
Yeah.
And
right.
That's okay. Right? Like that's the beauty of mentality and talking about how the mind works and mental health and all of that. So yeah, you start having a lot of success in those 24-hour races, and you head off to the world champs. And in 2007, the race is in Monterey Bay, I believe. That's correct. Yep. And you talk about how you like to lead from the gun. And in that one, you led from the gun in an epic battle with Tinker Juarez, and you led until like half a lap to go in the 23rd hour or the 24th hour, however we want it. Basically, you led till almost you couldn't, and then Tinker got you at the end. And take us through that day, and then I want to dive into like the mindset post that day, because I think that's way more important than whatever happened.
I'm with you on that. I felt super good going into this race. I was like, man, if I'm ever going to win one, it's going to be now. I think I was coming off a year where I think I got sixth the year before in Georgia, and Monterey is beautiful, and you can see the ocean at the top. So I just knew I was in this really good spot, and there was a bunch of Australians coming over, and there was so much talk on social media. They were going to dominate. Like, their goal was like, if they didn't sweep the podium, it was a failure. And I was like, geez, these guys are like ready. And I was really intimidated by that, but I was like, wow, we'll see what happens. That's why we line up. And the race, and Nat Ross was there, who's also kind of a big hero of mine. He's like a 6-time national champion. I mean, he's crazy fast rider. And so, the race goes, and I found myself kind of out front, and I was feeling good. I wasn't working super hard, but it was really hot, really, really hot. And I could handle heat really well for some reason. My crew was totally dialed. I'd come in, and they were kind of pushing the rules, I guess. We didn't really know the rules, but they would like people on each end of the pit with like a gallon of like freezing cold water just jumping over my head. My Nick Howe, like my kind of pit master for, head pit guy there. My cousin was able to make it, so Nick was there, but Nick was like, we got to keep his core body temperature down. And that was like a game changer. But then the race director came over, like, you can't do that. He's going to get disqualified if you got to stay within your 10-foot thing. And so we just kind of, on the fly, we're constantly like adjusting. But Tinker, man, that guy can handle heat too. And so we were just together riding, and I had never really had a conversation with Tinker. He was just a huge hero of mine at that point. He's one of the reasons why I got into mountain biking. He looked super cool. Him and Travis Brown kind of brought some rock and roll or kind of good vibes, good, you just look at them and I'm like, these guys look awesome. And so I was in front of Tinker for, like you said, he never went in front of me. He never drafted off of me because he likes to follow and stalk people. There were times where he was struggling. There were times where I was struggling, but yeah, I was really starting to fall apart. Not fall apart, but I was like starting to just get to the end of my fuel tank, at like hour 22, 23. I think he sensed that, and he just threw everything he possibly could into an attack. And I tried to follow him, and I just, there was nothing left, And I rolled in second place, which, I went there to win it, but I didn't. And I felt, these moments where like, you come so close to winning and that was your goal and you'd spend all this time training and, it's just all this money and all whatever, even though I had a lot of resources, it was still an expensive endeavor all around, and people are out there they fly out there, they rent cars, all the stuff. So the first part of this is, not winning it and getting second. Man, I actually felt great. I was like, I did everything I could. And I had a battle with my hero and he just beat me. The better rider won. And it's, it's profoundly disappointing in certain ways because, man, how cool it is to say you're a world champion. You know how not cool it is to say you're second place at the world championships. Some people, I think it's still cool, but it's way cooler to be a world champion. But man, the second part of that, it is really disappointing. But oftentimes, I think the sickness inside would come from you feeling like you're letting everybody down. Sometimes I can feel that way. And I know that I'm not letting anybody down, because if I flip that and it's my friends who are going out there and they had this epic battle and they ended up second, I'm like high-fiving. But if they come into the pit acting like a pissant or whatever, they're just like so negative, and I'd be like, that's just ugly, man. That just doesn't look good on you. And so I had that from the first race I've ever done in my life. I had this mentality of like, because I'd see other people, out on the trail, after a race, just their wives are there and they're just throwing their bike down. I'm like, whoa, we're just racing, we're riding bikes, man, And when you go to a world championship, there's a lot on the line and, doing it as a pro. But at the same time, man, I'm like, I did what I could. There's nothing else I could have done. It was a great day. We'll come back. We'll try it again, Yeah. So I've had people in my corner that help sort of solidify like your self-worth is not in your results. And you know what? It was a super fun, night that night. And I felt proud on the drive. Pride on the drive home, just thinking about how I fought with that. And some real quick story. Something that sticks out in my mind is my stepdad was a champion stock car racer, and he's a very quiet man, and he's very professional about what he does, and he's won so much. And one year he goes, I'm going to win the championship, and his goal was to win the championship in our hometown and then a town 100 miles away. And he was leading both all season. And on the last season, it was so close in this town 100 miles away. And it was the last night. And it was kind of he had it in the bag. And somebody spun out in front of him and totally took him out and took out the car. And which means he ended up second. And, he fought all season. And everyone was mad. I was mad. I was a little kid. I was angry about it. The pit crew was pretty mad. And then my stepdad was just very quiet and driving home. And he was just like, hey, man, we did what we could. And I just could not believe that he said that. I was like, my brain it short circuited and then kind of rewired, and then it was just business as usual, being a dad and going back to work. And I was like, there's, it's nothing really changed, had he won or not won, it would have been fun. But so that stuff just kind of, I can handle that. I can handle losses a lot, but I think that's through a little bit of therapy, through a lot of really good people in my life. And that's probably the thing I'm most thankful for, actually.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask you, like, how, aside from like a moment with an influential adult, with your dad like that, that's going to be huge as a kid. But obviously you still get to be an adult and you're still a really competitive guy. Like I've witnessed that, and so like, and not in a negative way, by the way, but just I've seen it, right? I've lined up next to you multiple times. And how as an adult did you get to that point? Because I don't think you just, like, I've also heard you talk about, like, it was my job to win. I had to teach myself to win. That's what I had to go do. End of the sentence. So, like, how did you transition to that where, like, well, That's the best I could do. If that's not good enough, it's not good enough. And saying like, well, my self-worth isn't in this, when you also are a professional and it's your job to go and win. Like, that is like two opposite like dichotomies that you had to cross. How did you cross that void?
Yeah. Well, and I'll say first, I think there are other riders out there in the pro ranks that actually, everything about their livelihood is on the line. And so I haven't had that per se, I've always had a dual career. Just off the top that, that changes things a little bit, but yeah, sure, man. It is tough. It is, you're not coming out of the womb being like, I don't care if I lose, even though I fought so hard to get here and won races, There are races where I've been in the lead by like a minute and a half and I flatted on a brand new tire. There was the year where my tire sponsor, they had a really bad batch of tires and they admitted it. They're like, we're just going to send you more. And I'm like, that doesn't help if I'm flatting. Like, I'll put a new one on after the race, but like, and I've had a few of those where I'm like, man, I could have won that. And you're kind of gutted about that. There are those times where it's just, I sit and kind of wallow a little bit. There have been some times on the Maah Daah Hey trail, that everyone there is like, well, Kelly's going to come and win, and I'm like, that's a really hard race to win, and sometimes, you're like, man, did I let everybody down, and I think as things got they progressed more before, I got to a later part of my career. It's kind of funny we're talking about this because something maybe we haven't chatted about ever is that I'm like the most nervous racer there is. I can't eat like 2 days leading up to a race. I'm like terribly nervous. And I guess that tells you right there that I want to do well, or I know how much pain I'm going to be in a mountain bike race because they're very painful. But, people would see that. So when I was right in the throes of just starting to win, because, coaches are like, once you learn how to win, that'll beget winning, and it's so true. It's getting that first win is so hard. I remember just breaking down in tears coming across the line of my first ever pro win. And that was another one I had to fight for with a really good friend of mine. But I just, when I started to be able to, win some races, every race was like, well, if I don't win, then I'm kind of letting myself down, So to your point, yeah, there was some of that. And then I'd kind of question, like, what could I have done better? Did I fail? Did I not train enough? And do I weigh too much or whatever, some of that stuff. It's like everything that goes through your mind. But people would see me doing that and they would see how nervous I'd get before races. And they would, really, one of my closest ever friends, this guy, George, who's kind of just, huge part of my life, huge mentor of mine, he would be cavalier about things, he'd be like, well, you get him next time. And he was a bike racer, but I was like, he would always be like, you care more about yourself than other people care about you. I mean, or you think about yourself in terms of this more than other people do. He's like, how many other people are you thinking about right now and how they did on their race? Or are you just thinking about your own race? Yeah, you're thinking about your own race. And so that really helped keep me on the road. There are some guardrails there. But, and as time went on, I'm kind of like, the fact I ever won one race is a miracle to me. So, if I'd have a bad race, it would just be a bad race. I'd call it. But the first thing I would do is go congratulate the person who won, because we're all out there fighting, and I never want to be that person coming into the pit area that's just upset and throwing their bike. I've never done that.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked a little bit about your mindset change. One thing I didn't have down here in a lot of detail, but that we should talk about is just the importance of the Maah Daah Hey 100 within the arc of your career. I think we would be just like absent-minded to like skip over that. So like, how did that race become such a big part of you? Because it's very nearby where you grew up, but you didn't know about it growing up.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah, because I wasn't even mountain biking or riding a bike, before I moved to Colorado. So, yeah, when I knew about the trail, because everybody talked about it, I'd gone out there. It was chunky. It actually wasn't all that fun, but I love the Badlands. So I had this like romanticized idea of what the Maah Daah Hey would be, and then you go out there and you're like, I can't even find the trail. So it kind of sucks,
Right.
And then, but once Nick Ybarra, that's a whole other discussion. But once Nick Ybarra got his hands on that and his passion for that took over the trail, it became a real something for me that it's like, okay, well, now I'm doing a lot of 100-mile races, and I feel like I want to honor North Dakota, honor where I came from. My grandparents have land near there. My mom grew up on the near the south end of the trail. There's so much about the Badlands and Teddy Roosevelt and just the beauty of that out there, and then the kind of spiritual aspect for me, just being out on the Maah Daah Hey. It kind of became this thing, where I was like, I feel like I need to be out. I need to be the guy out there going out there to win that thing, And then I'd go out there and I would get crushed, I mean, I would get lost, or just not prepared. And people from Minnesota would come in, and another guy that I knew from my early pro days would come out and win. And I was like, whoa, this is way harder, And then it became a bit of a puzzle for me. I'm like, I got to solve this puzzle because I know I can ride it faster. But, everything about that trail, to me is why I mountain bike. There's no bro mentality. It's a very simple relationship for me because it's just brings me back to being in nature. It's just one of these things where I was like, I love this, and it's absolutely so hard. To go and win it is not a given, not a given at all. I mean, I've had years where I'm under a tree falling asleep with heat stroke, I mean, pretty serious stuff. And then years where, we're getting some real fast times out there. But to me, it just reminds me of home. And it's funny, every time I go out there, whether win or lose, I'm like, I want to do my best to honor my family and honor the people that put this on, and just kind of honor like where I'm from. Not to sound existential about it, but that's kind of why it's become a really special thing for me, and then I just want more people to show up and do it. And that's happening more and more.
Yeah, for sure. And to be clear to everybody, like, you can easily find the trail now.
Oh, yeah.
Due to all the
yeah.
laugh about you couldn't find the trail fast, but you can today very easily.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I meant to say that because now you go out there and it's one of the most beautiful, I don't want to say pristine because that takes away kind of the ruggedness of it, Yeah. It's not pristine, but it is a full-on adventure, and it is now world class, and that's Nick and Lindsay Ybarra all the way, and their volunteers, the people that volunteer with them.
For sure. So finally, you are, as I stated at the beginning, we saw each other a week ago in Medora at a film premiere, and you are one of the two featured main characters in this documentary about this past year's Maah Daah Hey 100, and the doc will come out on this channel or on the Stable Cyclist YouTube channel in February. But you don't need to speak about the film, Kelly. People can go find it themselves. But you and I have literally spent hours and hours talking about North Dakota Badlands for the last 4 months. We've talked a lot too about how travel logistics can make things difficult for people trying to come there to race. But if you were going to pitch to people why they should go do this amazing race in the Badlands, even if it's a little bit difficult to get to, what is your elevator speech to them on why, like, everybody who has a mountain bike needs to get to this very incredible place?
You will never, ever, ever forget your time out in the Badlands of North Dakota and on the Maah Daah Hey Trail. I've said this before, it's unlike anything I've ever done, and it is so special. And yeah, it might be a little bit of a challenge to get out there, but I think that's actually what makes it even more special. I think people don't find themselves in the area of the trailheads for the Maah Daah Hey trail. And every single time somebody from Colorado or somebody from the other part of the U.S. that I know goes and does it, they'll talk about it forever. And it's a bit of a life-changing, not to sound grandiose, but it's a bit of a life-changing experience out there. And it's just, you just don't get that in a lot of places anymore. It's so out there, but it is just so beautiful. And again, it's worth spending a weekend and a little bit of money. We're not here for very long, and there's these places on earth that you should just go and do, especially when they're in your own country. But man, you'll never ever forget it. You can't replicate it anywhere else. You got to go.
For sure. I agree completely. I said at the beginning, there's like a favorite moment at the premiere for me. You were sitting next to me. In the film, spoiler alert, you announce, apparently this was a spoiler for your mom as well, you announced that you are retiring at the very end of this film from professional racing, and your mom whacks you on the arm and says, "You didn't tell me you're going to retire," and I about fell off my chair. But, I mean, it's out in the open now, or it will be very much soon. How, you are retiring, and so, like, how do you want people to remember your legacy in this sport?
I mean, that's a really good question. And sometimes I'm like, well, nobody cares that I'm retiring because nobody really knows me. Some people do, but yeah, the people that I think about often or remember, and think very highly of, all have something in common. And they're people that are kind. They're people that are open to other people. They went out of their way. They set ego aside. And these are people largely who could have a huge ego. I mean, we all have egos, but these people that I assigned a value to them, right? Like I'm like Mary. I'm like, you are an Olympian. And I think Mary's like, yeah, but whatever. And she means that when she's like, that doesn't make me any different, but I would find myself assigning values to people. But then at the end of the day, all that, I'll be sitting around a table drinking coffee with people that are like, that I've always just kind of looked up to. And I've always thought like, man, I just want to like, if I could like affect one person, literally, like I'm always like, man, I hope I can do that someday. And maybe I have. I'm sure all the relationships we all have in life, you don't know how somebody takes what you've said to them. And so I just try to make sure that I always say the right thing to what I know to everyone. And I just wish that I hope I can do that to somebody, where somebody was like, yeah, that's cool that he like won these races or did this thing or whatever, but we all have a life to live, and we all got to go back to our homes and go to bed at night, and and I just always wanted to be this person that like, I felt like I was given this like talent to go ride my bike, and I felt like I've squeezed every ounce out of it that I possibly could, and I just wanted to be able to kind of honor that too, because part of me does want to be like, I want to make North Dakota proud essentially, but man, there's so many great cyclists there. So it's not like I'm, there's just so many talented people there, but yeah, I just want to make sure that if people kind of look back on my cycling career, they realize like, well, he definitely wanted to keep passing this on from all the people that I've learned from. That's just going to flow through me, because man, that was so important to have those people in my life.
Sure, for sure. So the main thrust of this podcast, of my YouTube channel, aside from bikes, is mental health. And so the one thing I want to close out with is just, you've been riding with Gopher Graham now for 4 seasons?
Yeah, 3 or 4 seasons.
Somewhere around 3 or 4? Yeah. Why is it so intriguing to work with them? And aside from, I know you have some friends that are within the group, but why is the work that Will Stingley is doing so important? And we need more groups like this today.
Yeah.
And I know I did not write this question down for you, Kelly, and I apologize.
No, this is, man. I think for me, why it's super important is on our jerseys. There's a logo on the side. It has David Crimstock's name on it. Is the guy I raced with. I have a great photo of him and I on a podium together, and he's smiling, and we're all, I didn't know him that well. He tragically is not here anymore, and that is the biggest reminder ever. We're all out here playing on bikes and being in the dirt and stuff like that, and that's given me everything. I've said this to you. I think cycling saved my life, because I probably would not be where I am today. Who knows without it. That doesn't mean cycling is the end all be all. So there's a multi-layered plan for people. It's just you have to have a community. And Gopher Graham is just an incredible community. I think if what's great is, like, I'll win a race and it'll just be part of like a Instagram post with a bunch of other cool news, and I'm like, I love that, because they're not like, here's the guy who won this weekend, I mean, they're proud of that, but you realize, like, this is a very, very genuine and very powerful movement, of just getting awareness out there for people's mental health. Man, and I even the older I get, and I feel like I'm pretty lucky in that I've never dealt with too much, but dealt with some. There's some stuff that runs in my family, and just having a community to reach out to. I did a keynote in Fargo not that long ago, which I saw you there in Fargo as well. Yeah. But reaching out to Will, just being like, hey, I really want to talk about some stats, just so people can wrap their head around it, because we talk about it in these ethereal ways, of like, get outside, do the, of course, but to the mom who's, dealing with all these kids and work, and she's like, yeah, well, I did 30 minutes of yoga today, and that's my workout for the week. It's so there's a bigger discussion to be had with all of this, and a bigger focus needs to be put on some things that we can do that aren't only medicine, isn't only, get outside, it'll fix you. It's just a big discussion that needs to be happening,
For sure. Well, and I think that's kind of why we're doing this, right? It's just to show that two dudes who love bikes can be willing to discuss it and see how it threads through our lives. So, Kelly, thanks for your time today, man. I love any time we get to chat or hang out or have coffee, but this was special, and I appreciate you being our first guest on the show here, man.
Oh, man, it's a total honor. It's always fun to chat with you, man.
For sure. Kelly Magelky, everybody. Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks for having me.